Very often in big and complex forms, we need to group some related data. And in this video, I will teach you how you can add support for data grouping for your dynamically generated form. For that, let's go to the interface that describes the dynamic control, and in addition to already existing control types, we add a new one called group. The TypeScript give immediately a hint that a corresponding component has to be added to the dynamic control resolver. So let's add a corresponding key right here. And now we have to create a component that needs to be rendered for this type of control. For that, I just open the terminal and use the following Angular CLI command in order to generate a new component that has the name, as you can see, dynamic group. So I hit enter and the component has been successfully created, and I can close the terminal and immediately add this component to a collection of dynamic controls. Likewise, other dynamic controls, it has to also extend the base dynamic control class, so let's do that. Those things I can also remove, and of course it has to import also the reactive forms module. So here we go. Likewise, other dynamic control types, it has to be also wrapped with some node or ng container, and it also has to have the form group directive attached. So something like that. Here inside, you can define any HTML structure you would like to have for your group of controls. I will use a combination of field set and legend tags that I used in the previous section, if you remember, because I already have appropriate global styles for those tags, so I don't need to care about the look and feel anymore. In this structure, the legend tag works as a label, so let's read the corresponding property from the control config, because all control types will have this label property. And already to the field set tag, I'm going to apply a directive called form control name, and if you remember from the previous sections, this directive manages and binds the form group model instance to the view. The only value this directive needs is the group key, so let's just provide it right here. Great. Now let's think. The form group is actually a group of related form controls, right? Right. Then it means that it would need to render the controls that belong to this group. So far, we don't have such a property where those controls will be declared and where we can access them. And that's why I would suggest you to extend our dynamic control model and add a new property called, again, controls, which is actually needs to be optional, and also it has to have a type, actually the object where the key can be any string and the value is dynamic control. I can reuse this type from the dynamic form config instance by reading the controls property. And now it means that I can go back to the dynamic group control component, and like we did at the very beginning of this course section, I can iterate through the controls object that we just introduced. And in order to be able to iterate through the object, I'm going to split it into key value pair using the key value Angular pipe. Here inside, we have to perform pretty much the same logic we did before when we dynamically created form controls right here. I can even copy this piece of code and insert this logic into the dynamic group component. Sure, I have to import the required dependencies like the control injector that we can successfully reuse, and also I have to inject the control resolver. That is going to be an instance of dynamic control resolver service. Awesome, done. By the way, if you feel bad about the copy-pasting this logic, feel free to extract it into a separate component or so, but I will leave it as it is in order to save time. Maybe in the future I will do refactoring, I will do it in a separate video, let's see, but so far let's move forward. Basically, the dynamic group component is ready for the usage, but keep in mind, I didn't say that the entire form will work. But before, let's quickly add a new config for the group inside the JSON form config. So let's go there, and somewhere between the user role and terms and conditions key, I create a new control with the key, let's say, social profiles. The control type for this field I define as a group, and then I'm going to add the following label for it. And obviously, because it is going to be a group, I have to define the controls key and list there a couple of controls for different social media resources. So let's add maybe a YouTube control. This control will have the following config. So it is going to be an input with a label YouTube, and the value is going to be null, and the input type is text. And let's maybe add some additional key controls, like maybe Twitter. And yeah, here we go. And what else we could add? Facebook, no, it is almost dead, but Instagram, why not? Yeah, so let's add the control for this social network as well. And the config looks ready. But as I said before, if we try to run this code right now, we will get an error in the console, and this error actually says that it couldn't resolve those new controls like Instagram or Twitter. The problem here is located in our form model builder that, if you remember, we created at the beginning of this course section. So right here. This builder currently doesn't support group resolving. It creates only one root group instance, and then it just adds the regular form controls to this group. So we have to slightly refactor and extend this method in order to support this new feature. I'm pretty sure that there are many ways how it could be implemented, but I will go with the easiest and most obvious way, in my opinion. So first, let's extract the control creation into a separate private method that I'm going to name build controls. This method will be accepting 3 arguments: the control key, which is going to be a string, then there will be control configuration object, which has a type of dynamic control, and the third argument is going to be a form group where those controls have to be actually registered or added. And once we did it, then we can move the following logic inside this method. Just like that. And here I just have to, rename those stuff. So here will be config, there it will be just control key, and I will be adding the control to the form group that is provided as an argument. So here we go. Now I can use this method here in the for each loop and provide all the required arguments for this method like this. Then inside the control builder, we can do a simple check, like if the control type is a group, then we will call a method that can create a group, and immediately after that we just exit from this build controls method. This new method would also need the control key that will be eventually the key for the nested group that this method will create. Then we have to provide controls for this group that will be created, and also the form group where this new nested form group needs to be added. So it will be kind of a parent group. Great. So let's create this method here above, and yeah, so it has a parameter control key, which is a string. Then the controls property has a type of property controls from the dynamic control interface. And then we also have a form group, which is regular form group instance. And because the controls property is optional, first of all, we have to do a simple check and check if controls exist. And if they don't, we just exit from this method without any actions. But if there are controls provided, then we create a nested form group instance. So let's create a corresponding constant. And again, in the for each loop, I go through the nested controls and create corresponding form controls for this nested group by calling again the build controls method. But this time I provide a nested form group instance as a form group parameter for the build controls method, because I want to register those form control instances inside this nested form group. I hope it is clear. After that, all the nested controls will be instantiated and added to the nested group, and I just have to register this new form group within a parent form group, which is provided as an argument for this build group method. And by the way, let's maybe rename it and say explicitly that it is a parent form group, so it will be a bit more clear. So let's quickly recap the logic. Well, we basically start to go through root controls, so to say, and try to build those form controls. Here we check if it is a group. If not, we resolve validators and add a new form control. Then comes the next iteration in the loop, and we check again if it is a group. And then let's suppose that this time the control type is a group, so then we have to build the group. It creates a nested form group instance and builds controls for the nested group. If it encounters again the form group, the process will just repeat. So in such a way, even if the nested group has its own nested group, it will work fine. I hope it is clear how it is working, and now finally it is time for testing. So I load the form and you can see that it was successfully loaded without any errors. Now let's try to fill out this form. So I'm going to add my name, then also the email, then I just pick the role for my user, then let's add the social media links. So this is my Instagram, then here is my Twitter, and here is my YouTube channel. Here we go. So still the form is not valid because I have to tick this checkbox because we have the required true validator there. And once I did it, I can submit the form, and you can see that the data was resolved just fine, everything was grouped properly, and the form itself was successfully reset.